this,
Goes
and
right.
that's it. interesting. Unfortunately, you've got to go now for your duties at the cathedral, so thank you very much for coming. Please be seated. Yeah, all right. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on our website. Please can members also remember to speak directly into their microphones and to switch them on before speaking. I've also been asked at meetings of the Council to make a standard evacuation announcement. Please note that in the case of an emergency, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the Council chamber at once, taking your personal belongings with you. Following the green fire exit signs to leave the city centre onto Duke Street via the stairs, which are located near to the end of the corridor adjoining this chamber. Lifts should not be used. Please gather by the War Memorial immediately outside the Civic Centre, and if and when it is safe to return to the building, an announcement will be made. You should not return to the building until told that it is safe to do so. Anyone attending this meeting is entitled to film it, but I should point out that only the councillors, officers and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure that cameras are pointed only in this direction. Please would you silence or switch off your mobile phones whilst this meeting is taking place. I would like to remind members that there are 3 styles of voting that can be used tonight. These are a show of hands, voting by assent, or a recorded vote, which would have to be requested by 10 members. I would also like to remind members that those moving an item of business have 10 minutes and a right of reply for 5 minutes. Those seconding items have 5 minutes and can reserve their right to speak before the mover of the motion has the final say. All other councillors can only speak once for 5 minutes per item. This must be before I invite the seconder or mover to speak at the end. Thank you. Agenda item 1. I have received apologies for absence for this meeting from Councillor Knight, but you're here. Thank you for joining us. Massey, Sampson and Thompson. Are there any others to report?
I've also had Councillor Wilson, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, Mayor's announcements. By the end of February, 294 engagements, meetings will have been attended by us, the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor. Just over 11,000 raised to date for the Mayor's charity, Farley Hospice. There are other forthcoming fundraising events which you will be informed of over the next couple of months. Item number 3. Members will be aware of the need to declare any interest they have in the business at this meeting, either now or when we come to the item. Does anyone wish to declare an interest at this point? Agenda item 4. The minutes of the meeting on the 18th of December 2024 have been distributed. Are you happy to accept them as a correct record? In that case, the minutes are approved. Agenda item 5, public questions. Agenda item 5 is for public questions. Any member of the public may ask a question on which the council has powers or duties or which affects the city. Questions must not exceed 2 minutes, and the total period allowed for question time under the council's rules of procedure is 30 minutes. There is not an opportunity for supplementary questions. We have received 2 questions from the public for tonight's meeting, And I invite Mr. Chambers to ask the question at this point. Sir.
Thank you, and good evening, Council. Please, can someone define what a climate emergency is and when it will be over? When I previously asked questions on this subject to this Council, Councillor Moore appealed to the authority of the IPCC. So let's talk about the IPCC. As Richard Lindzen, former Professor of Meteorology at MIT, has said of the IPCC itself is only studying anthropogenic climate change. It doesn't do anything regarding natural climate change, and that's a severe technical shortcoming because you can't do things like attribution unless you know what natural variability is. Thus, the IPCC ignores natural reasons for cycles of climate change, such as the Earth's position relative to the Sun, the amount of radiative energy emitted by the Sun, the fluctuations in the amount of water vapour, the Pacific decadal oscillation, and the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. Not surprisingly, an organisation that was created with the sole intention of finding evidence for man-made climate change finds evidence of man-made climate change. Another common criticism of the IPCC is that its summary for policymakers is unnecessarily alarmist and does not accurately reflect the information buried in the report. For example, Chapter 12 of the IPCC 6 report states that, and I quote, "There is a low confidence of an increase in floods, rainstorms, landslides, drought, fire weather, cyclones, hurricanes, tornadoes, sandstorms, dust storms, hail, sea level rise, coastal flooding and erosion." But no one reads that bit. Finally, how can the Council reconcile its transition to EVs with its modern slavery commitments when we know that forced child labour is used to extract the rare earth minerals required for EV batteries?
Thank you, sir. Councillor Moore, I can just about see you. This is getting worse.
I will stand, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question and for coming in person to ask it, Mr. Chambers. You are right that the United Nations has an interest in identifying global problems. Indeed, it was established in 1945 after World War II to promote international cooperation to maintain peace and security, address global issues like poverty, disease, environmental sustainability, to further social and economic development, and to address a wide range of global challenges, and I would consider climate change is one of those. So the definition of a climate emergency. Well, a climate emergency refers to a situation where urgent action is required to reduce or to halt climate change and to avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage. It is also a call to address the profound change that we are seeing in our weather systems all of the time. We've seen major floods and fires recently. We saw our hottest ever days on record 2 years ago, and every year appears to be warmer than the last due to human activity. You raise a key point, sir, about the ethical sourcing of materials like rare earth minerals, which can indeed involve forced labour and severe environmental degradation. And as a council, we must balance our climate goals with ethical considerations. And we do this through our procurement policy when we can ensure that our supply chains are transparent and responsible. When will the climate emergency be over? Well, that is a good question, and I do hope that globally governments take bold action and agree the consensus that we are contributing to the effects on our planet. Chelmsford City Council declared our climate and ecological emergency with cross-party support in July 2019, with the goal of making our own activities net zero carbon by 2030. Now that is a challenging timeline. We're also encouraging others to join us on that journey. So we are continuing to work to reduce carbon emissions, to lower energy consumption, to reduce waste and pollution, to improve our air quality, and to increase biodiversity. The climate emergency will be considered over when those goals are achieved and sustained, and we need national government to step up too and continue strengthening acts such as the Environment Act to ensure that others do the same. Councillors and Mr Chambers, the vast majority of scientists accept that climate change is real and it's contributed to by human activity, particularly through the burning of fossil fuels. And the scale of change and the action required to reduce it can feel overwhelming. However, there are some very practical benefits that for our residents, when we take action locally to cut the cost of living and to improve air quality. If we can require all new homes to use less energy and use water more efficiently, our residents will have lower bills, which have skyrocketed in the last 3 years. And as a country, if we reduce our dependency on imported energy and fossil fuels, we will be less exposed to risks from dealing with potentially unstable or hostile regimes. If we require our vehicles to emit less pollution and to continue to improve our walking and wheeling routes, the air we breathe will be cleaner, and we are already seeing benefits from lower polluting vehicles being available. Our air quality monitoring shows improved air quality on major routes and at hotspots like our Army and Navy junction, which is no longer registered as an air quality management area. Now, the Love Your Chelmsford platform provides more background and detail on this, including links to our declaration, our action plan, and our annual greenhouse gas report. And the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee will meet next on the 10th of March, when an inform and debate session will focus on the climate emergency and the climate and ecological emergency and our corresponding action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I understand that the member of the public who submitted the second question is not here tonight. Members will have seen the question, which was circulated not only to members but published on our website. I will now ask Councillor Moore to respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor. And I'd also like to thank the member of the public for her question. So the member of the public is interested to know how we respond regarding planning consents to protect the hedgehog population, which is now very much at risk of extinction in our country, particularly with regard to the development at Bewley and Chelmsford Garden Community, and also asks whether swift bricks may be installed in new builds to give this red-listed bird some breeding capability. Well, in response to that, I'm pleased to say that yes, we are looking at planning consents and making sure that conditions are being put forward when developers create infrastructure and new communities. It's the National Planning Policy Framework that says that planning conditions should be kept to a minimum and only imposed where they are necessary, relevant to planning and the development to be permitted. They should be enforceable, precise and reasonable in all other respects. And in the right circumstances, conditions are attached to planning permissions to secure biodiversity enhancement, and that is now strengthened through the Environment Act 2021. These enhancements can include soft landscaping, but also swift bricks, bat boxes, log piles for newts and amphibians, and cut-throughs in fences to support free movement of hedgehogs. And it's also vitally important that we continue to encourage developers to engage with biodiversity policies so they can manage their land sympathetically for the habitats that could be affected otherwise. The review of our own local plan is currently on a pre-submission consultation, and I would encourage all members and to encourage your residents to please take part in that and have your voices heard. We've also amended this to strengthen the policy basis for the use of appropriate conditions. and the proposed changes to policy DM16, which is the protection and promotion of ecology, nature and biodiversity, specifically now state that measures and features should be incorporated into the design of new buildings, extensions or renovations to increase biodiversity locally. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Agenda item 6 is Cabinet question time, and I understand at the time of the deadline of noon on Monday, 3 questions had been submitted for Cabinet members. There is a right of reply to ask a supplementary question or comment, which is, if exercised, also applies to the Cabinet member. The first is from Councillor Paul Clark, and I'll ask Councillor Ely to respond. Councillor Paul Clark will then ask their question.
Right, thank you, Madam Mayor. The question is regarding urgency decisions. That I just wanted to know how many have been put to the Leader of the Council and not supported. There isn't a timeline on that question, but let's say in the last 12 months. And can you outline examples of urgency decisions that are not supported? Thank you.
Councillor Ely.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your question. There are no urgency decisions that have been put to Cabinet or the Leader of the Council that have not been supported. Paragraph 4.3.2.9 of the Council's Constitution permits the Chief Executive to take urgent decisions. Urgent decisions can arise in relation to... Oh, I've lost my place. Sorry. Urgent decisions can arise in relation to executive or non-executive decisions. In relation to executive decisions, the Leader of the Council is consulted, and in relation to non-executive decisions, the relevant Chair or Vice Chair is consulted. Your subsequent question was about key decisions and executive. Was that? No? Does that answer your question? Or?
It does, but I did have a comment to make about the answer, if that's okay.
Have you finished?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. The reason for the question, and it was something I raised at a recent Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, is that members will have noticed how many urgency decisions have come to their attention taken by the CEO. And the pattern seems to be that the question of the urgency decisions are made on matters that have been going on for some time. And I was concerned that they're not insignificant amounts of money when you add them all up. And secondly, why are they not brought to full council? If it's a sensitive issue, it can be heard under a closed session, but members are not hearing about these decisions until after they're made. And I didn't think that was appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Ely, do you wish to reply?
So this is regarding key decisions and executive decisions. So in addition to calling, there are further safeguards where executive decisions are taken under urgency powers, e.g. notice requirements relating to key decisions. Where a key decision arises, briefly, these are executive decisions which involve 200k income or expenditure or affect more than 2 wards. At least 28 days' notice of the proposed decision must be given. Such items are included in an executive decision notice. Where such notice has not been given, the decision can still be taken if it must be taken by a particular date and is impractical for it to be deferred. Where this happens, there is a requirement to notify the Chair of ONS, General Exception 4.6.12 in Constitution. Where a decision is extremely urgent and it is not possible to give at least 5 days clear notice, the decision can only be taken with the agreement of the Chair of ONS for special urgency. It should also be borne in mind that the Leader and other Cabinet members, if authorised by the Leader, can legally take executive decisions individually at any time, but Chelmsford City Council's past custom and practice has not been to do so. This means that when executive decisions need to be taken outside of the usual Cabinet timetable, their urgency powers will be used. Does that answer your question further?
Thank you, Councillor Ely.
Thank you.
Second question is from Councillor Hyland, and I'll ask Councillor Ely to reply to that. Councillor Hyland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The recent LGA Peer Challenge in December 2024 provided this council with some recommendations. Its first of which was specific to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. What steps have been taken to strengthen overview and scrutiny since that report? The key comment that I pulled out was that the Commission, the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, were to review it and strengthen the overview and scrutiny and wider governance. The Peer Challenge report stated that overview and scrutiny currently fails to provide pre-scrutiny or policy suggestions as it looks at issues retrospectively. Will LGA Peer Challenge recommendation be taken forward to ensure it is within current and any future design of local governance?
Councillor Hyland. Councillor Ely.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your question. Contact has been made with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny to arrange training sessions for the Chair and Vice Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, with the possibility that that is also provided to all members of the committee. Discussions will be taking place with other local authorities that have shown to have good scrutiny practices to develop a pool of resources for comparison. The democracy team has been looking into the current call-in procedure and looking at how best to improve this. This could include an easy-to-use form for members and the setting up of informal call-in discussions to iron out the primary reasons for a call-in before taking to committee. I wonder if the Chair of Committee has any further questions. We would look forward to receiving them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyland, did you? No? Thank you. I'm sorry? Sorry.
Madam Mayor, can I just add to that I welcomed the peer review and the comments made, because I think culturally there was a sense that when we were asking questions and trying to scrutinise, that was seen as perhaps not our role. I'll come to the report later on. I think it's now more accepted that there is a role that we should be dealing more with the scrutiny and less with just observing the activities that are going on, because I think that's really what's been happening for some time. We have done some proactive work and call-ins, but I'll discuss that later. But I think there is a move, and certainly I, as the Chair, welcome that change and the training and looking at best practice from elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeeps. Councillor Still, I understand you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's rather a long question, and I'll try and cover it as quickly as possible. And also appreciate that something's changed today that will partially change the answer. So this is about the land at Little Waltham that is in my ward, which I raised at Cabinet. It's currently a pasture land, so it's already got biodiversity. It was for sale for £420,000. It was in the public domain. But the actual price paid by Chelmsford City Council, I think when the deal was done last May, was confidential. I actually asked in Cabinet, was there a reason for it being confidential? And there was a series of answers on that, but it was kept confidential. And I have, at the weekend, I registered my objections to this view with the monitoring officer, because it seems to me that the amount paid should be in the public domain. Whilst I personally question the process of reducing net zero by spending significant amounts to absorb the carbon rather than actually using the money to tackle the carbon emissions at source. So I would like an explanation as to why we think it's necessary, not just to plant these trees to do the absorption, but also why do we have to buy land at such a massive price to plant those trees. I wonder if the price paid is embarrassing to the administration, hence the price was kept secret. It's been kept secret for 9 months. Of course, I do welcome the protection of a green wedge, which is where it sits, as I'm sure do the residents of Little Waltham. But I note the land has been purchased with an overage provision of 30% for a period of 50 years, triggered by non-agricultural or non-equestrian development. So the inclusion of this clause means that the council has the ability to use the land for development in the future and pay the seller a part of the gain. Surely, if there's an intention to keep it as pasture land or nature reserve, then no such clause would be necessary. Therefore, I listed 4 questions in my original question. The 2 were, could the Cabinet member please now state the amount spent to acquire the land? And if not, explain why this has to remain confidential. I accept I had an answer from the monitoring officer on that today, that it's no longer confidential. But I still wonder why, given the homeless crisis, there is a need for this purchase rather than use it to provide permanent accommodation for homeless families. And can you confirm that the land will remain a nature reserve and not be used for development in the future?
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your question, Councillor Steele. And indeed, when Councillor Steele did ask this question at Cabinet, officers confirmed that the purchase price is often confidential. The Council provided the information to Councillor Steele soon after the meeting on a confidential basis, and the information on law position has now been properly considered. Just to clarify this, and Councillor Steele has been advised that it's acceptable for the figure to be in the public domain. So I can confirm that the figure was £480,000 purchase price, and that includes the related charges for legal services and stamp duty and so forth. Councillor Steele, you ask why, given the homeless crisis, there's a need for this purchase rather than to use it to provide permanent accommodation for homeless families. There's no conflict here. We have a housing crisis and a climate crisis, and the Liberal Democrat administration is addressing both. We are urgently addressing the need for homes through our comprehensive housing strategy, and this will create a supply that meets local needs. And we are working with developers and partners right now to provide larger family-size homes and specialist support for vulnerable people. We are pushing for genuinely affordable and net zero homes through robust planning policies, which are embedded within our local plan. We are providing homes, mitigating the effects of climate change, and restoring habitats by forging strong partnerships with social and private landlords, landowners, and neighbouring councils. And land such as this in Little Waltham is relatively cheap, precisely because it cannot be built on. In order to plant 1 tree for every resident of the district, we need land and secure land, and we are planting at scale. This site will be open and accessible to the public for activities such as walks and nature trails, so important to our health and well-being, and our education. So I consider that an educational asset as well as an environmental asset. And the City Council is also keen to identify any sites where affordable homes can be built. However, generally speaking, land for housing is dramatically more expensive than for planting. But, Councillor Steele, if you do have a suggestion for a site where we could build affordable housing, please let us know. This Liberal Democrat-led council will continue to lead by example, to guide Chelmsford's growth, to be a greener, fairer and more connected community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Steele?
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Can I just correct one thing? Maybe you didn't mean to say it. I was not suggesting that this land was used to build houses on. I was suggesting the money that was spent on this land could have been used for the homeless. I just want to raise the point that I have a list here and I won't go through it, but after the Cabinet meeting, I think it took me 2 or 3 emails and then a complaint to the monitoring officer before the actual price paid was revealed. So the price stayed confidential for 9 months after it was paid. And I wonder why it stayed like that for so long and why I had to write so many emails and make so many queries for it to be overruled. in fairness, the monitoring officer did actually say it did not meet what's called the EIR criteria for maintaining confidentiality. Well, that's true now, and it would have been true last end of May, June, July. So why did it remain confidential for so long, and why did I have to work so hard to get the price revealed?
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Do you wish to reply?
I would need to defer for the detail to our monitoring officer on the basis of that was the relationship that was first established.
Understand. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
I have provided the detail to Councillor Steele today, and I think what needed to happen is a proper consideration of the information law position. There is an exception in the EIR provisions, and there's a 4-stage test in that. So to consider whether something is confidential or not, you need to just go through the process, and that's what needed to happen. I think I accept it took a while for that to happen, but obviously when you did raise the matter directly with me, I've gone through that with the Information Governance Manager. We did turn that around quite quickly, so usually when we get an EIR request for information, we have 20 working days to do that. So it does take a bit of time because you've seen the considerations you have to go through, so you have to just logically work through those tests, really. And we obviously do need the background from the Service Department as well. So we did turn, once I had that from you this week, I did turn that around quite quickly. But obviously, I think perhaps the lesson for the future is, maybe, and this is for officers as well, is if a councillor asks a question like that in a meeting, is we just simply, at that point, we take it away and process it under what we would normally do under treat it as an information request in effect, and then come back to you and give you the answer. That's probably the best way, and I think if that happens at a meeting when I'm present, that's what I will do, is take that away and deal with it on that basis, rather than the Service Department perhaps dealing with that themselves and responding to directly without knowing what the information law position is, if it helps.
Thank you, Lorraine Brown. Okay, we come to item number 7, reports from the Council. The first one, agenda item 7.1, is the Local Council Tax Support Scheme 2025-26. The 3 reports under item 7 are from the Cabinet on the 28th of January and will be introduced by Councillor Chris Davidson. The first is on the Local Council Tax Scheme for 25-26. Councillor Chris Davidson, I can just about see you. Please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's a requirement to approve a local council tax scheme every year. The proposal is to maintain the current scheme. It's the same scheme we've had for 10 years now. It's a very important support that we offer for lower income households, both those who are pensioners and those of working age. I would like to be able to make the scheme more generous, but given the item we're about to move on to, we can't afford that, unfortunately. I've also heard suggestions from some quarters that it should be made less generous. Let's be clear, it would be wrong to place a disproportionate burden of helping with the City Council's budget on those who can least afford it. So where that leaves us is that we continue with the existing scheme. So I'm happy to take questions, otherwise I'll simply move the report.
Do you have a seconder?
Second, please.
Are there any questions? All those in favour? Anyone against? Okay, the item's approved. I have lots of things to say if it all goes wrong. So, agenda item 7.2, Capital, Treasury, Management and Investment Strategies for 2025-26. This item is, as I've just explained, Councillor Chris Davidson, please advise.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report contains 3 strategies. These strategies come to Council every year in February. The Treasury Management and Investment Strategies have already been debated at the Treasury Management and Investment Subcommittee, and they go from there to Cabinet, where we had a brief discussion, and they are recommended by Cabinet. The Treasury Management one, the significant point is that we're moving the focus on investing our surplus cash, which is what we've been doing in the past, towards managing the external borrowing that we're moving into in the future. On the investment one, it's simply an update of the current year's strategy. Now, the third strategy is the capital strategy, and that's really a part of the budget, which is item 7.3 that we're about to move on to. So I'd be happy to talk about that if there's any questions, but I think it's best dealt with, from my perspective, as part of the overall budget discussion. So I'll sit down at this point and formally move the report.
Thank you. You have a seconder? Councillor. Thank you very much. Any questions, any comments? So.
Yep, thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree entirely with what you've just said. I'm slightly anticipating, but can I have additional time to respond to the budget when it comes to it, rather than the 5 minutes, rather than speak for 5 minutes on that now? The Mayor has to ask everybody if that's okay, I understand.
We have discussed this, and I'm assuming you'll all say this is okay, and that we will allow extra time for questions. It's one of my...
Madam Mayor, I assume I get extra time to respond to the extra time as well.
Okay. So all those in favour, and we'll discuss it at the 7.3. 7.3 is on the budget for 2025-26. Please note... Oh, sorry. Sorry. All right. Although you might want to discuss it in the next item, I have to say we vote for it now. So all those in favour of that report. All those against? All those abstain? Is that passed? That's agreed. Now we come on to item 7.3. 7.3 is on the budget for 25-26. Please note there were no amendments received by 12 o'clock on Monday, 12 p.m. deadline on Monday. Therefore, after it is discussed, we move straight to the recorded vote. Councillor Chris Davidson.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor. So this is the budget report. We're setting the budget for next year, 2025-26. Chelmsford is at a critical point. The question we have to face is, how do we pay for the services that residents need? The announcement of local government reorganisation means that this is going to become even more difficult as we go forwards. I'll focus initially on next year, 25-26. We will maintain services for another year. In fact, we can improve services by investing in various upgrades at the Riverside Leisure Centre, to the lockers, the ice rink seating, the cleaning system, and to permit extra classes. At Chelmsford Sport and Athletics Centre, to provide further improvements there, and above all, at Bewley Park, using a contribution from a developer to create a new 6-pitch sports and recreation ground. To pay for these services, we propose to increase council tax by 12.5 pence a week. We've increased our fees and charges. That was at the last meeting in December, and they pay for most of our services, in fact. The other way to pay for services is government support. That, unfortunately, has been falling for years and is continuing to fall. So that's the challenge. As regards council tax, most residents pay their council tax in 10 instalments. Currently, on average, they'd be paying us £212 a year for their council tax. This budget will increase the instalments that they pay by 65 pence. That's the amount the government has set. The actual increase will be £8.48 because the county council, the police, fire, and so on have precepted, is the technical term, asked for significantly larger amounts. I'm going to move on to future budgets, though, because this is the most difficult budget that I've experienced this year. And the future looks as though it's going to get even more difficult. The City Council's finances have been under pressure for nearly 5 years now. From COVID-19, when lockdowns hit our income from car parks and leisure centres, from the huge inflation and cost of living crisis under the Conservative government, and sadly I see that inflation today has been announced at 3%, so well above target. And from the housing crisis, the cost of housing people who can't afford to either buy or rent has risen massively, and we expect it to get much higher, in fact. So all this means that our costs have been rising fast. Far more people are being evicted, they can't find an affordable home. So they come to us, we provide emergency housing. That's called temporary accommodation, and the numbers are up massively, and the price of each property is up massively. Compared with 5 years ago, we're now spending something like £370 for every £100 we were paying then. The national living wage, it's good that we're paying our lower paid staff more, but we're now paying staff £140 today compared with £100 that we'd have been paying them 5 years ago. And the council tax that we are paying today is £114 for every £100 5 years ago. Those sums just don't add up. Now, that's not just the City Council. Something similar has been happening to councils up and down the country. Local government finance is simply unsustainable, whichever party is in charge. Some of the councils have run out of money, and I could list a lot of them. The government, I'm sorry to say, has been making this even worse. The employers' national insurance contributions that were imposed in October last year add £870,000 to our budget. We were promised at the time that local government would be protected. The protection that we've been offered is about a third of that, less than a third of that, which, to my mind, is a disgrace. If you're not going to go through with a promise, don't make the promise in the first place. They're also planning to make cuts to the government grants that we get, moving the money to other areas, stripping it out of areas like Chelmsford and moving that support elsewhere. And then there's local government reorganisation. That will create new financial risks, extra one-off costs that could be several millions of pounds. The government already knows this, and they've already told us that we expect that areas will be able to meet transitional costs from their existing budgets. Well, I've got news. We haven't got room in our budget to meet those costs. Worse still, I'm shocked to discover that the government seems to expect Chelmsford residents to shoulder some of the burden of repaying Thurrock's debt as part of this local government reorganisation. So we're going to have to work through this and develop a financial plan for the future to continue paying for the services that Chelmsford residents rely on. So in summary, I'm afraid the Conservative government failed to solve the crisis in local government finance. The Labour government has made it worse and will take even more funding away from Chelmsford. This is an authority which, as the peer review found, is delivering commendable outcomes to the people of Chelmsford. So I'm just hoping that the people of Chelmsford can continue to have the best administration for many years to come. In the meantime, in order to enable that for another year, I'd like to move that we pass this year's budget, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson, are you going to second that? And are you going to reserve your right to speak at the end?
Yes, thank you.
Any comments, any questions? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think probably some of my other colleagues will say things as well, but thank you for the... It shouldn't be too much additional time because we don't disagree in most of the cases on the actual revenue budget itself. What you've just said is entirely correct, and governments have not supported us. ones included, really. We did have a coalition once, if you remember, and that was no better than the rest. But the latest situation is appalling, and those who saw these pathetic efforts that the government are making about saving money for the future, well, we know they're pie in the sky, really, so you have a very, very difficult task ahead. I can't deny that. And so, from the sort of normal point of view, the only point I would raise, you didn't actually mention it, is the brown bin charge that's been introduced. You would expect me to mention that. And clearly, it is very unpopular with residents. And it's interesting that Brentwood introduced, they have a charge of £60 a year as well, I think. And is it today or yesterday, they proposed to go back to having weekly collections of black bins because the alternate collections weren't working. Sorry, Basildon, sorry, I do apologise. Whereas Brentwood have gone equally the other way round. So there's a great problem if we start merging with Brentwood, for example. God knows what will happen. If we start merging with Basildon, well, I shall retire instantly. But that's another matter. We mustn't be unkind to our friends in Basildon. But they have a difficulty. And you mentioned Thurrock. Well, yeah, that situation is beyond any of our understanding, really. So there is a great deal of difficulty at your end. And as I say, we understand that. Car parking charges and things, yes, they've gone up. Nobody has come to me rushing around saying they're going to go up by 20 pence or whatever it happens to be. And so from that point of view, as I say, unless you look at the other points, which are expenditure on capital, that was referred to by Councillor Steele there, really. And yes, you have a choice. You're choosing one against the other, or as Councillor Moore suggests, working on the basis that they're equal, but I'm not entirely sure that would be correct. Now, if we go back to the monitoring, to the Section 151 report, it says a couple of things on that. Chelmsford waterside development has potential financial upsides that have been not included in financial planning. The Council has committed £43.6 million of capital expenditure on this scheme, funded in the current financial planning from grants and SIL. However, no proceeds for benefits have been included as yet. And I think this is where we see the problem. He also says the redevelopment of the waterside site has stretched the finances of the council given the overall costs. Now, it is our understanding that you are intending to use that site to reduce revenue expenditure in the future. But given the situation now with reorganisation and the points made by Nick earlier on, really, we may, I think, need to rethink our capital strategy. And indeed, we have a meeting, I understand, next week to discuss that particular one and maybe others, really. But it is, do we hang on to what we've got? Do we spend it all immediately, which some councils apparently have done in the past? Certainly not, I think. And again, you've written the budget based on where we were, and things have already moved forward. And hearing the Thurrock story is beyond understanding. So that we have to think again: do we actually give away our assets to save future revenue when we won't exist? We're to be abolished. Having spent years trying to get us to become a city, really, depressing thought we have to ask all over again, really. But I've got a copy of the previous one, so we're okay. And that perhaps takes me on to a point that you made at the last Cabinet meeting, which was about property sales and the results of those property sales. I don't want to be critical, but you indicated that the sale of the council properties, which was done in 2002, produced lots of money that kept this council solvent. They produced £41 million, my understanding is. Now, I have obtained a list of all the properties that we sold whilst we were in charge. And lots of those were empty properties. Remember the old cattle market and all sorts of places. There are lots of sites here that I could mention that you would never have heard of, really. It's 20 years ago in some cases, and therefore more difficult to understand. But the actual total raised was £102 million by us in that period. So we raised £60 million by selling off surplus assets. How much do we spend? Well, we spent £32.8 million of that on buying properties, the service station and other such land, and some of which are good and some of which has turned out not so good of late, really. The Vistion project, for example, produced lots of money because interest rates were, 1%, something like that, and we were earning a great deal more money than that. So those monies were also spent on Riverside, you mentioned earlier on, really, and that, again, was something that clearly is successful. On recycling, we built the recycling centre where the car auction used to be. That land had been given away, and due to a previous brilliant legal officer, we managed to get back possessory title that had been claimed by the car auction. So there were various things that the money has been spent on. The last two I'll mention, I don't want to overstretch my time, was the money we sold the Bond Street car park. And what did we get? Well, we got John Lewis in exchange, really. So that was a pretty good deal, I think, really. Britvic was another one where we had a fixed rent of £35,000 a year for the next 50 years, which we sold for over £3 million. And we've got the Britvic Clockhouse Centre there. Again, super popular. So our view remains that property is the key to the success of this council. We still have lots of properties, and they're listed in that report, of ones we could sell and ones we could retain and so on. I can only urge you to look very carefully at that. It would be nice if you consulted us, but I understand politics being as it is. But there are situations now where passing our property forward to save future revenue costs, as we're to be abolished, that may not be necessary in the way that it was felt before, really. Depressing the word abolished is. I keep seeing it in these slides, really. I hate every time I see it. We're extremely successful, all of us, not just us or you, but collectively. The residents are happy people, and the thought of merging with others less successful than us is something that I think none of us want to see. So, as I say, regrettably, we'll, on the subject of the bins in particular, we will oppose that part of the budget. For the rest of it, then I wouldn't want to oppose it directly, but I don't have a choice of doing it. I wasn't going to pass amendments and produce alternate budgets and so on, because that would spend the whole evening going through that. So I can only say, look very carefully at what we're doing. The money is spent on the bridge, which we've got to give it a name. I would have called it White Elephant, but I wouldn't dare say that. Bow Bridge, I believe, has been suggested, hasn't it? But we've spent all the money that we spent on all these properties, 32 million, in building a bridge which, as yet, will produce no revenue. A depressing thought. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Jeeps.
It follows a theme, really, in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it and the strategy. And I also want to make on public record something clear from a previous meeting that we had when I had an answer for Councillor Lynn Foster about the site that was the Riverside site and a boarded off area that is completely adjacent to and separate to the car parking area. I think what we've agreed is that I was asking one question and was getting an answer to something different, in terms of the fact that the answer included the car parks and the revenue from the car parks being part of the reason there had been no progress. Subsequently, I've had a meeting outside of public and have had the detail explained to me, and I do understand what has happened. But whilst I do understand that, the facts that have been provided by Councillor Whitehead about the strategies that have been actually followed, I do wonder whether, when we've actually declared a housing crisis and we're spending money on buying green sites, which we have plenty of to plant trees on, and spending money, capital money on that, when we are not pursuing things in a dynamic manner that would give us perhaps either capital or the opportunity to house people, whether we're actually moving in the right direction and acting, as has been said by Councillor Moore, in an urgent manner. Because the 44 million nearly spent on the bridge This has gone on for a long time, and as stated, we've seen nothing. I think we should be acting much more dynamically and quickly to maximise the benefits that we have, and perhaps looking at our priorities and saying where they should lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeeps. Councillor Popper. I think just for the time being, if you can just stay there and ask your question.
So, thank you, Mayor. I'm just asking a question. So can I be in that seat so my residents can see me asking the questions?
All right.
So it's important because this row is not covered.
All right. Just come forward to the seat.
Thank you.
And they'll know it's not me.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor. Tonight, just a general comment that I've been observing. Tonight, we have been asked to consider a budget that I strongly believe is heading in the wrong direction. A budget that does not serve the long-term interest of Chelmsford and its residents, but instead deepens financial instability. When the Conservatives was led Chelmsford Council was left with authorities with healthy reserves that were built through responsible financial management and prudent decision-making. Reserves that should have been safeguarded to protect our city against economic uncertainty. Yet since the Liberal Democrats took control, those reserves have been spent at an alarming rate, and now we are staring at a deficit, not just for this year, but with even deeper financial problems looming on the horizon. This is not a responsible governance. This is short-term thinking at the expense of Chelmsford's future. The Liberal Democrat-run Chelmsford Council, as per your own books, is facing a significant shortfall. The deficit is projected to reach around 4 million in 2025-26, growing to approximately over 13 million in the next 5 years. This will result in higher council charges, reduced services that the City Council provides, and tonight's agenda is showing that is happening. Let's be clear, this deficit will not just be a problem to the council. It will be a burden on the hardworking residents of Chelmsford. Higher charges, reduced services, and possibly even increased taxes will be priced. They are forced to pay for this administration's mismanagement. While Labour continues to raise taxes, increase costs for working people, it is clear we need a strong financial management to focus on local priorities and maintain essential services. The current trend of the Liberal Democrat-run Chelmsford City Council, I repeat, the current trend of the run Chelmsford City Council is showing the same pattern as the Labour government in running the country. Again, we don't want the Liberal Democrats running a Labour-style council here in Chelmsford. Additionally, I would like to request the City Council to take full responsibility for the current situation rather than attributing the fault to the other parties. And I keep hearing about Conservatives, and now you have been in power for the second term, you're in administration. The residents of Chelmsford deserve transparency and clarity on this matter, and have a right to understand the precise plan to mitigate this situation. The Conservative administration also, I would like to highlight, Chris Davison just spoke about, if you can't meet the promises, don't make the promises. I repeat, if you can't meet the promises, don't make the promises. I would like to remind City Council that during previous City Council election, the Liberal Democrats said that they won't introduce brown bin charges. Not true. I see the same part of the Labour government in the City Council with manifestos, programs. Okay, so a budget should provide stability, sustainability, and value for money. This budget, I believe, fails on all counts. This is why I don't think I'm not in good support of this. Thank you.
I believe that if a councillor makes an untruth and is challenged, he should either repeat the untruth or withdraw it.
I would like to withdraw that statement if it's not.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no problems. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Popper. And then Councillor Clark and then Councillor Hyland.
Thank you. I've just listened to the banter here, and it is banter. I can't agree to the budget because of the brown bin charge, but my observation from this, after what we heard earlier about devolution, is that to a large extent, anything past 27, 28 is irrelevant anyway. This council, whoever has been in charge, is a victim of the success because the other councils it's likely to merge with are not in a situation we are. So this council is going to suffer because of that. The cost of borrowing is going up at an alarming rate. And I've mentioned this before, and it's on the capital account, but the revenue account has to pay for the interest on it. And it's interesting to note that the revenue produced by the brown bin charges is offset by the money going out on the additional borrowing that we're about to make. So you're balancing it that way, but you're asking all the residents to pay for it with their garden waste charge, and I just don't think that's fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Hyland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, just clarity of this revenue budget. How is it impacted by the MRP, as Councillor Clark has just mentioned? I wanted just to draw some attention to page. Bear with me. Oh, bear with me. Sorry. What's it now? Page 20. Lost it. Sorry, Madam Chair. Page 98 in the pack. Point 7, Bewley Park, new grounds, top up of £800,000. Is this council funding spending, or is it developers, spending of developers, S106 contributions, just from a different development? I understand the developer had made a commitment to provide this facility, and is it because the costs have gone up, we have to fund his shortfall? And then at 21, provision for works identified for building conditions surveys, 4.7 million of spend. Is that money just being set aside just in case we need it? Or is it truly needed? Have we got these surveys back and we actually do need to spend it? Because again, that would have a significant impact on the revenue MRP funding of debt. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hyland. Councillor Talkback.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're sympathetic, I think, to the financial challenges facing the council, and we do understand, although, as Councillor Whitehead said, we don't agree on all the details, why you feel the need to increase charges and introduce new charges, such as the garden waste collection. The report mentions affordable housing, and of course it's right that we continue to build homes that people can actually afford, allowing residents to remain local. I know a great deal of officer resource and money was put into negotiating the recent scheme for 55 affordable units west of the Fox and Raven pub, Chelmsford Village, which would have included the transfer of 30 hectares of land into City Council ownership. But the scheme was in clear contravention of council policies on the Green Wedge, and when it came to planning committee, only by the way because the local Conservative ward member took the initiative and called it in, it was unanimously rejected by that committee. Why did the cabinet member for Greener Chelmsford, the member who after was responsible for planning, watch it get so far in the process and then speak against it at the meeting? Would anything have been said if the Conservative ward member hadn't intervened and called it in? The deputy leader, who I guess was representing the administration, spoke in favour of the development, which I have to say was quite a brave thing to do, given the mood in the gallery.
Can I make a point of order, please? Just to point out, it wasn't a unanimous vote of the committee. There were members who didn't vote for it. So, okay, just to clarify.
But by that stage, the deputy leader of the council was really a general without an army. At that meeting, it all felt rather chaotic and really a waste of time and resource. And this isn't to put any blame on our councillors who did an excellent job in putting in the hours, but I think they were really set up to fail in that instance. Given the financial pressures that Councillor Davidson has outlined in the report, can we have more joined-up thinking from this administration around such proposals in future to avoid this happening again? And could I also add, could we have an assurance from the administration that it does respect the Green Wedge designation and isn't actively supporting development in the Green Wedge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Davison, do you wish to reply before Councillor? Oh, sorry. I do apologise. I didn't see you at the back. Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm towards the end of the line, so a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I would like to make a few points. I would like to oppose the budget. Nothing would give me any more greater pleasure, really, or satisfaction, but I can't, because it's a balanced budget and it's been approved by the Section 151 officer, so you have my vote, but I'm only lending it to you, because since you came into power 6 years ago, your capital programme has been less than perfect. And you have another example here again this evening where you spent 400 and something thousand pounds buying some place to put some trees down. Lovely to do, nice to do, let's all do it. We can't afford it. You're in the position now, we're in a position as a council only to do the things that we need to do. So that's the message I want to bring to the table. Just spend the money you need to do. I've made a lot of these points before, and I'm not going to go over them again. The other thing is your revenue budget still needs working on. So, as people have said before, don't run and hide into the unitary authority of 3 or 4 years' time with a deficit. We've got, you've done a reasonable job so far. The helicopter view, reasonable job. Down in the weeds, it's not as good as it could be. So you have my vote, but I'm only lending it to you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Councillor Pooley.
Thank you. Would you forgive me for staying seated, Madam Mayor?
I just want you to stay seated.
Yeah, I won't try and anticipate some of the points that I'm sure Councillor Davidson and Councillor Robinson are going to make in summing up. But I just wanted to bring some of the debate back to the one specific objection which the party opposite appears to have made to the budget, namely about brown bins. Now, I'm sure in summing up other people will have something to say, but I wanted to come into this because I had a phone call and followed by a long text during the week from a very thoughtful resident who I sometimes agree with and sometimes don't, who was saying that he was very disappointed that I'd lost all of my principles about making sure that the rich paid for things that the poor couldn't pay for and all of these things. So why on earth were we insisting that the garden waste was coming in and so the rich people would pay a bit of it, but those who could afford it less would pay for it as well? Now, I got a bit irritated, but I didn't get in the ring with it too much. But I did say that if he wanted us not to put the garden bin waste charge on, what would he do instead? And he was notably silent on that fact. Because we can't go about in this financial environment suddenly wishing that we'd bought more land or sold less land or accelerated this project or that project, or that we had a different government from the one that we had or the different government from the one that we've got. Councillor Davidson has had to deal with the position as it is now, and as have we all on this side of the House, in trying to debate the rights and wrongs of different elements of charging policies and so on. So, yes, I'm sometimes accused of being to the left of most Liberal Democrats, and I remain quite proud of that fact. I have to say that had I been living in a marginal Labour Conservative constituency, I might, for the first time in my life, have voted Labour. But I live here, fortunately, and didn't have to, and very glad that I was voting where my heart was. But our point here, and Councillor Davidson mentioned it in his talking about the council tax. Someone had mentioned to him that it would have been nice to create the council tax regime so that those that could afford it less could pay less. But we've only stuck with the original scheme because we can't afford to improve it. And there are lots of other things in this that this party opposite has been encountering that we would have loved to have done more about for those that could afford it least. We've had big debates about riverside charges and how that's slanted to a certain extent and now a bit more towards those who could afford it least. So we're here having to do our job year by year. I would love to do much longer term planning, and maybe that's a pledge that the Labour government might sometime get around to doing something about. But in the meantime, we're dealing with what we've got, and we're dealing with it, well, I can still vote for it, let me put it that way. And we have big arguments over here about how to bring us, if there is a criticism that one can make, it is that the party opposite in power for however many years that was, 20 years, didn't borrow any money at all when the costs were so low. And when we came into power, we had debates about whether we should borrow it now. It was fully our intention to do so when the need arose. And that's what's had to happen. Unfortunately, rates have gone up through affairs that we all know about in the meantime. But the criticism is not about this or that detail. The suggestion that there should be a further debate about the prospects for the capital budget, I think is a good suggestion and one that we would have encouraged anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pilley. Councillor Franks. Sir.
Yeah, I wasn't intending to speak on the motion this evening. I think it will be summarised quite effectively, but I just wanted to bring up the regular comment that I think this side makes on if you oppose the budget in some way, we would like you to submit something to suggest why that is. I think the argument that it would just extend the meeting, well, we're here to discuss it and to find a way forward together. So I would prefer to have something to debate against on that function. And just on an aside on something that Councillor Whitehead mentioned earlier, the Vistian building. Obviously, I can't talk too much about the Vistian, given that it's in a confidential element of Treasury management. But I would like to point out that Councillor Whitehead bought the building in the first place. So just to clarify, I'm not sure what he expects us to do to save money if we didn't buy the building in the first place. But I'll let Councillors Davidson and Robinson summarise after this. Thank you.
Thank you. No one else? Councillor Davidson? No. I haven't finished. Did you wish to say something, Councillor Davidson, or straight over to Councillor Robinson?
Well, I think I come after Councillor Robinson.
No, right, okay. It's all down to you.
Well, there's hopefully, I don't think it's all down to me. I'm sure Councillor Davidson has made a few notes. So, yeah, as I think Councillor Davidson said, this is the 6th Liberal Democrat budget. The first was knocked sideways by the pandemic, and the 5 since have encountered a whole raft of huge challenges. It has at times felt a bit like whack-a-mole. You've got rampant inflation, you've got Liz Truss crashing the economy, you've got a national living wage increase, we've got national insurance contributions and local government reorganisation. I'm sure that, and then there's the fair funding formula that's coming next year as well. I'd love to have full responsibility for our income and expenditure, Councillor Papper, but we don't. And that was the problem that Councillors Galley and Whitehead encountered in their time in charge. We don't have control of our income, or a large part of our income, and expenditure is also forced on us. Literally, between the time we drafted the Cabinet report and the time we got to Cabinet, we had to find another £630,000 just for national insurance contributions. So it would be great to be in charge. I mean, as has been said, government support has gone down and down and down. When Councillor Whitehead was in charge, we used to get £14 million a year in revenue support grant, and now we get 0 revenue support grant, although we've got some other bits and pieces that we have to apply for. But if you look in the budget chart, you will see the actual cash from the government is down compared to the year that's just ending. And the only way they say that it's balanced is because they expect us to raise council tax. But we can only raise council tax by 3%. And our part of the council tax is just £228 a year on a Band D house. That's tiny compared to the sort of money that any household spends on fuel or food. £228 a year, you get an awful lot for that money. For this council, that's just 1/4 of our income, and that's why fees and charges are so important. To be fair, Councillor Whitehead has talked about how he generated income by buying property. Unfortunately, that sort of magic trick has been banned by the government. We're not allowed to buy property anymore to generate income. So we just can't do that. Some councils, as we know, went on weird and wacky expeditions to buy property all over the country. Something I agree with Councillor Whitehead on is we won't do that. We only invest in our own district. But the difference between this administration and your administration is that when you had a problem 10 years ago, you got rid of over nearly 30 staff, whereas we prefer to increase fees and charges. We think that's fairer because we don't think the public want to lose their services. So we debated fees and charges at last council. I make no apology for increasing those fees and charges. You need to make an apology for which service you would cut, but are refusing to reveal to the public which service you want to cut. Where is it? As was just said, where's your proposal to save the £1.3 million? Haven't heard it, and you don't have put forward an amendment. As Councillor Franks just said, if you've got something to propose, let's hear it. I'm glad that Councillor Whitehead doesn't disagree with most of the revenue budget. That's great to hear. But the thing we came up in the answer to the question to Councillor Moore earlier, what I don't get is the misunderstanding. There is not a choice to be made between the environment and housing. We can do both. And the capital budget, although it's under more pressure now, isn't under nearly as much pressure as the revenue budget. Because as long as there's a business case for an investment, we can either use our own resources or we can borrow. And as long as we can cover the costs of borrowing, that's an entirely legitimate business proposition. That's what businesses do. You borrow to invest to grow the business. And that's what we've been doing. So we have invested. I know the party opposite have been terribly grumpy about it. We invested in the theatre, and last year and the year before, what was that? The best and the second best year in its entire history, breaking even for the first time in its entire history. And what has happened with our leisure services? We've got an amazing team in the leisure department who in 5 years have doubled the turnover of the leisure department. In the last couple of years, we've had a huge push on increasing membership at the leisure centres, and that's good for public health and fitness as well as for the council's revenue. So if you think this is heading in the wrong direction, where's your alternative proposals? I haven't heard any, and so it's just hot air from the councillors opposite. And actually, probably, I'm not sure which of us is going to say it first, but Councillor Davison can give you the update. The garden waste charge isn't terribly unpopular because we've raised over £1 million in a month. I don't think we've ever done that before. So we're well on the way to raising the amount of money that we need to raise as per the budget. The Corporate Peer Challenge disagrees with you when it says that when you say the council's heading in the wrong direction. We've had one of the best corporate peer challenges in the entire country. It talked about clear leadership from the chief executive and the officers and from the political administration. So, you know, I take that. I'll take that any day over the words of the opposition. I mean, yes, times are tough for all councils, all parties, all colours. Times are really tough. But we're still able to do some great things. We're investing in the Dovedale's Leisure Centre, and we hope that that will also improve the service in the same way as we've invested in the theatre, for example. We are working with the County Council to build the new station on land that this council owns, and we're going to be running the car park there as well. We've invested in Tyndall Square, which has been a fabulous public open space.
Councillor Robinson, could you? Sorry.
Yes, I was just... So there's lots that we have been doing. We'll talk about Waterside on Monday. And yes, it's good news that it hasn't yet been quantified, because when it is quantified, that will be more good news to come. And we've invested in the co-working space, which will be ready in a few weeks' time, just across the way here. We're doing an awful lot to invest in the facilities to grow our district, to support jobs and the greener economy. And that's why I'm proud to support this budget, despite the difficult decisions that are contained inside it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try and respond to the comments that have been made. I'll start with Councillor Knight. Thank you for lending us your vote. I'm grateful. This year's budget is affordable. I've always said that the capital programme has to be affordable. And for next year, it is affordable. And that's why we've got a balanced budget. After that, I've said it gets more difficult, which is why we need to review our spending. And it may well be that we will have to reduce some of our aspirations in order to make sure we can afford what we're doing. So I agree with Councillor Knight on that. Councillor Papper, I'm glad that you withdrew the false allegation that you made, so thank you for that. Can I point out you made another one, though, and I'd like you to withdraw that as well, which is you said that the reserves were strong when the Conservative administration left in 2019, and that we squandered that, I think, some words to that effect. Can I point out that the reserves, as of the 31st of March this year, are forecast to be £28 million, and the figure, the equivalent figure from 2019, when the Conservatives left office, was £13 million. So far from damaging our reserves, we've actually more than doubled them in that period. So, yes, you're going in the wrong direction, I'm afraid, Councillor Papper. When it comes to the Councillor Whitehead's comments, can I just correct Councillor Whitehead on something as well? It's not really relevant to this, but Brentwood has gone back to fortnightly black bin collections because of their low recycling rate, rather than going back to weekly. So when it comes to I wrote down Brentwood. Okay. So yeah, we'll talk about property next week. I am happy to consult. We've arranged a discussion next week. We're always happy to talk to you about budget matters, property matters. So yes, we'll be very happy to do that. The brown bin charge, what I want to say about that is, yes, it is very, very disappointing to hear you say that you will oppose the brown bin part of the budget. How can you oppose the brown bin part of the budget? That brings in £1.3 million in the coming year, and we are required to have a balanced budget. If you take £1.3 million out of the income, you don't have a balanced budget. The one thing I agree with that Councillor Papper said is that what we need is strong financial management. That is what we're getting from this administration. That is why the peer challenge said that we are an excellent administration. So I'm sorry that the party opposite seems to have lost sight of that. I agree with Councillor Clark. We are, in a sense, victims of our own success, and I've already said that it's disappointing what the local government reform is going to do. And I think that I've responded to all of the specific points that I felt I needed to. So at this point, I'll sit down. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. I understand, because there was no amendment to the budget tonight, that there will be a recorded vote. Mr. Bird.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'll just run through and ask each councillor if they're for, against or abstaining for the budget that's been put forward. So first, Councillor Ditcham.
For.
Councillor Armstrong.
Against.
Councillor Bonnet.
Against.
Councillor Bugby.
For. Against.
For.
For.
Against.
For. For.
For. Against.
For. Against. For.
For.
For. For.
For.
For.
For.
For.
Against.
Against.
Councillor Knight. For. Councillor Lodge.
For.
Councillor Lee. For. Councillor Mascott.
For.
Councillor Moore. For. Councillor O'Brien.
Against.
Councillor Papa. Against. Councillor Cooley.
For.
Councillor Potter.
Abstain.
Councillor Rakesh.
For.
Councillor Reid. Councillor Robinson. For. Councillor Sherlock.
For.
Councillor Sidney.
Against.
Councillor Andrew Foley.
For.
Councillor Jeanette Soji.
For.
Councillor Skill. Again. Councillor Sullivan.
Abstain.
Councillor Taylor. For. Councillor Fullhaps. Against. Councillor Trump.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Whitehead. Against. And Councillor Young.
For.
So the motion has been carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Right, we're now on to agenda item number 8, which is a submission for approval of the pay policy statement for 2025-26, which Councillor Ely will present.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be brief. The Localism Act 2011 requires that each local authority produce and submit to full council for approval an annual pay policy statement. The pay policy statement attached to the meeting's agenda is self-explanatory. I hope. So I do not propose to go into any further detail. Therefore, I recommend the council recommend the council's pay policy statement for 25-26. Thank you.
Do you have a seconder?
Do I have a seconder?
Robinson?
Just a bit consistent.
Yes. Are there any discussions? The motion is to approve the recommendation of the report. Will those in favour of the recommendation please indicate by raising their hand? Agreed. We now have agenda item 9, which is the annual report of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for 2023-24, which will be introduced by Councillor Jeeps.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, as a paper, you have all the detail of this. I just want to make some highlights on that. The purpose of this is to consider the annual report of the activity of the Overview and Scrutiny function. I think there's been some comments earlier about the peer review, which have been responded to, and I think it's true to say that we do need to sharpen up the scrutiny part of this and culturally accept that there will be people who will be looking in a constructively critical way at the functions that are taking place. It was interesting earlier in the period that I took over as the chair that when we invited public to come and speak about a particular item, one of the councillors said it wasn't the place for it. Clearly it is, because engaging with local people and other stakeholders is just part of the process of the overview and scrutiny, and I would like to see more of that take place. So we have the programme of work, which is set out on page, read it, 166. I don't propose to go through everything, but what we have done is have some very useful presentations about what is happening and how officers and councillors are working together for the good of the people of Chelmsford. And there's been some tremendous work done. So that has been covered. We have also had a couple of call-ins where we have asked to look at those things in more detail. But I do accept that we are really on the back foot in terms of not looking at things perhaps ahead of the curve and being able to be more constructive about those. There's also been a task and finish group, which again worked very hard on the issues around the theatre and the way that that project was managed. And I think the conclusions that will come and the documents that came out of that will be very useful for future projects, even if we've gone to a different structure and we're actually under a different regime, because I think they bear a good example of how things can be managed, and we can always look at improvements. So in terms of this, unless there's any specific questions on any of the areas that are covered in the document that you've already had sight of, I would move to recommend that the report is accepted.
Thank you, Councillor Jeeps. Do you have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Whitehead. Anyone wish to comment? Speak? Motion is to approve the recommendation in the report. Will those in favour of the recommendation please indicate by raising their hands? Recommendation is agreed. Thank you. We now go on to urgent business, and I have not been informed of any urgent business. This concludes the evening's business, and I thank you for your attendance.